It was the kind of afternoon you don't think twice about. The sun was warm but not overbearing, glancing off the rooftops of modest homes in rural Sumter County, South Carolina. The trees swayed in a breeze that carried the smell of charcoal grills. Kids laughed as they rode bikes in wide loops. Radios hummed quietly from open garage doors. There was peace here, the kind of peace that lives in neighborhoods tucked just far enough from the noise of cities. On that afternoon, Ashly McFarland, just 11 years old, was right where she belonged, surrounded by family and neighbors. Bright-eyed, with a smile that seemed to invite everyone into her world, she was the kind of child who reminded adults of joy they'd forgotten. To know her was to feel warmth. But that peace wouldn't last. Because just a few houses away, an 80-year-old man was alone. Behind his front door, no music played. There was no smoke from his grill, no laughter from his porch. And behind his stillness, something was changing. What happened that evening didn't erupt, it advanced slowly, like a shadow stretching at dusk. Ashly would be shot. Her father, wounded. Police would descend on a crime scene that made no sense at first. But the real shock came after the arrest. When the man in custody, elderly, seemingly frail, told police there was another body. One no one had seen. His wife. In their garage. Dead. 2 lives taken, 1 neighborhood upended, and an entire community left asking the same question: what pushes someone, at that age, that point in life, to kill? This is not just the story of a double murder. This is a story about silence, warning signs, and what happens when rage festers behind the face of familiarity. Welcome to Sumter County. This is what happened. You could pass through this neighborhood in under 3 minutes. A narrow 2-lane road snakes through modest homes set back from the street. Tall pines stand like sentries between properties. Lawns, some neatly kept, others overgrown. It was the kind of place where people waved from porches but rarely knocked on doors. Familiar but not close. Reuben Leonard lived at the bend in the road. His house, modest and tan, didn't stand out. But for those who had lived nearby long enough, Reuben had become something of a fixture, a man who rarely left his home and even more rarely spoke. 80 years old. Alone. A face that once smiled at passers-by now remained hidden behind drawn blinds. But ask the neighbors and they'll tell you things began to shift in the months before the tragedy. It started subtly. Reuben stopped waving. He began glaring from his porch, his eyes following kids on bikes or families walking dogs. One neighbor recalls a moment in winter he stood outside, just watching. Didn't say anything. Stayed there for nearly half an hour. There had been complaints, small ones, at first. Raised voices over backyard target shooting. A call to the sheriff's department. Then another. Reuben hated the noise. It wasn't just an annoyance, it consumed him. Then came March 25, 2024. Deputies were called after Leonard began shouting at neighbors from his yard. They cited him for breach of peace, a charge that doesn't carry weight on paper, but neighbors say it shook them. He was different after that, one man said. Like something inside him was unraveling. No one imagined what would happen next. But behind those walls, Reuben Leonard was stewing. And with each passing day, the world outside his window became more intolerable, more threatening, at least to him. The question now wasn't if something would happen. It was when. She had just turned 11. Ashly McFarland. A name that now echoes through a community in mourning, a name once written across school projects in pink and purple marker, doodled in the margins of a math notebook, whispered in giggles across the cafeteria table. Her world was small, but it was vibrant. She loved to draw, not just random sketches, but entire scenes. Her favorite, a backyard fair, complete with cotton candy clouds and glittering Ferris wheels. She dreamed of becoming an art teacher. Those who knew her say she never entered a room quietly. Ashly didn't whisper, she sang. Loudly, off-key, but with every ounce of joy she had. Her teachers at Alice Drive Elementary say she was the kind of kid who changed the weather in a room. Her best friend, Mia, says they had plans, big ones. We were gonna run a dog rescue together, she says. We even picked the name. Perfect Friends. Ashly loved animals, especially dogs. Her own, a black Labrador named Biscuit, still curls up next to her bedroom door at night, waiting. The day it happened, Ashly was playing in a neighbor's yard. Her father, Dazan, was nearby, always keeping an eye on her, even when she insisted she didn't need it. No one expected that Reuben Leonard would walk out of his house with a gun. And no one expected that a peaceful Saturday would end in horror. Dazan did everything he could. Witnesses say he screamed for Ashly to run. She did. But it wasn't fast enough. A single moment. One that would change everything. Ashly was shot and killed just feet away from safety. Her father, trying to shield her, was also struck. He survived. But survival doesn't mean the same thing anymore. The house still stands. Her drawings still hang on the fridge. Her room untouched. But the laughter that once spilled from the yard, it's gone. What remains now is silence. And questions. Because Ashly McFarland was not just a name in a headline. She was a little girl with dreams, plans, and people who loved her. And now all of that is gone. The scene was still unraveling, emergency lights flashing against the quiet pine trees, neighbors held behind yellow tape, some crying, some just staring, frozen. Reuben Leonard was already in custody. He didn't resist. He didn't speak much. And then, without warning, he did. In the back of the patrol car, surrounded by officers still trying to process the chaos of the evening, the 80-year-old turned to a deputy and said something that made them stop in their tracks. He confessed. Unprompted. Calmly. He told them he'd done something else, something even more unimaginable. "You need to check my house," he said. "I shot my wife too." Silence followed. It wasn't a raving outburst or a garbled statement of confusion. It was quiet. Direct. Chilling in its clarity. Deputies who heard it didn't know what to believe. Some thought it had to be the rambling of a man shaken by what he'd done, trying to make sense of the violence he'd just unleashed. But they had no choice. They acted fast. Squad cars peeled away from the scene, racing down the narrow roads of Sumter County toward the Leonard home. What they found would confirm the worst. Inside the garage, lying lifeless, was Felicia Leonard, 76 years old, shot once. Pronounced dead at the scene. There were no signs of a struggle. No indication of a robbery. Just silence and a body, and the brutal truth that this wasn't a one-time act of violence, it was something deeper. Something buried for who knows how long. Back at the station, word spread quickly. Investigators stood stunned. Officers, some of whom had worked with Reuben's family before, delivering wellness checks or responding to calls over the years, couldn't understand it. The man who'd just gunned down an 11-year-old neighbor had killed his wife, too? Why? And more importantly, when? Because if Reuben Leonard's confession was true and his wife had been dead before the shooting on Alpine Road, that changed everything. Now, what was once a neighborhood tragedy had turned into something else. Something even darker. And the questions were just beginning. By the time the crime scene tape had been pulled down and neighbors were allowed to return to their homes, the questions were multiplying faster than the answers. Deputies and investigators were left with not one, but two bodies and a man who had given them both without hesitation. Reuben Leonard was booked, held without bond, and quickly separated from the general population. But behind closed doors, detectives began to unravel the tangled web that led to this moment. The first step, the timeline. They traced his movements in the days before the shootings. That's when they found something troubling. Leonard had been arrested just 2 days earlier for a breach of peace. Neighbors reported a disturbance. It wasn't the first time. Police reports painted the image of an aging man who had grown increasingly frustrated with his surroundings. He lived next door to families, many with young children who occasionally practiced legal target shooting on their private land. But to Leonard, the sound of gunfire wasn't harmless recreation, it was an attack on his quiet, his control, his peace of mind. Complaints were filed. Conversations were had. Deputies had visited the home before. But what they didn't realize, what no one could have fully understood, was that Leonard wasn't letting go of the tension. He was internalizing it. And it was building. Investigators turned to his background. He owned firearms legally. He had no felony convictions. And at his age, he'd never once been flagged as a serious threat until now. But as they combed through the evidence, details began to emerge. The weapon used to kill Ashly McFarland and injure her father was a handgun registered in Leonard's name. Investigators believe it was the same weapon used to kill his wife, Felicia, though ballistic confirmation was still pending at the time. The bigger question, though, loomed over everything else. Why? Was this simply rage? A man pushed past his limit by noise and neighbors? Or was it something more complicated? Was it the deterioration of the mind? Detectives brought in psychiatric experts. Theorized whether Leonard had been experiencing cognitive decline, dementia, paranoia, or had he simply been waiting, storing away his anger, planning this violence, knowing exactly what he was doing? The truth was elusive. He hadn't left behind a manifesto. There was no social media rant, no note. Just a confession. 2 deaths. And a weapon that answered only part of the story. Sumter County investigators were now left with a task that would extend far beyond forensics. They had to ask, at what point did an old man in a quiet neighborhood turn into someone capable of calculated execution? And if they couldn't find that answer, how many others like him might be waiting in silence? In the storm of headlines and breaking news alerts, one name was barely spoken. One life quiet, unassuming, lost not in public chaos but in the solitude of a closed garage. Felicia Leonard. She was 76 years old. A wife. A neighbor. A woman whose final moments are still shrouded in silence. While the world focused on the horror that unfolded across the street, the life of a child cut short, a father wounded, a neighborhood turned upside down, Felicia's death became almost a footnote. An afterthought in a case defined by shock and outrage. But behind the man with the gun was a woman who had lived beside him for decades. She shared the same home, the same routines, the same view of the quiet cul-de-sac. And yet she did not share in his rage, at least not outwardly. Neighbors said she was polite. Rarely seen but never unpleasant. She didn't file complaints. She didn't argue with anyone. She was, by all accounts, the opposite of Reuben, reserved, patient, careful. But that only deepens the questions. Did she know what was coming? Was she aware of her husband's growing fury? Did she try to intervene, to talk him down, to stop something from happening before it was too late? Or had she long ago resigned herself to silence? There are no police reports suggesting domestic violence. No calls to their home about disturbances between them. But when Reuben confessed to killing his wife, it was with no hesitation. Authorities found her in the garage. One gunshot. No signs of struggle. The act wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. And it happened before he ever stepped outside to confront the McFarland family. That sequence alone raises haunting possibilities. Was Felicia the first step in Reuben's plan? A final act to remove the only person who truly knew him? Or was she a casualty of proximity? Someone who stood too close to a decision already made? In death, she was quiet, just as she was in life. But now, investigators are left asking the questions she never got to answer. What did she see? What did she hear? And most haunting of all, could she have stopped it? Or was she the reason it couldn't be stopped at all? In the days that followed the shooting, the grief still hung in the air, thick, silent, and inescapable. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, and neighbors walked their dogs a little quicker past the Leonard home. But beyond the heartbreak, the system began to move. Charges came swiftly. Reuben Leonard, 80 years old, now faced the full weight of South Carolina's legal system. 2 counts of murder in the first degree. 1 for the 11-year-old girl whose life ended far too soon. 1 for the wife he shared decades with, found shot in the dark hush of their garage. And additional counts of attempted murder for those caught in the chaos. The father wounded trying to save his daughter. The bystanders. The community. Leonard was taken to Sumter Regional Detention Center, held without bond. There would be no release, no house arrest, no bail. The man neighbors once knew as quiet and withdrawn now sat behind concrete walls, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life, however long that might be, in a cell. But the path ahead isn't straightforward. Leonard's age, his state of mind, these details will likely shape the trial more than any testimony could. Will the court evaluate his competency? Was this a mind unraveled by age and decline, or a cold and calculated decision? His defense may argue dementia, or mental instability, a sharp contrast to the deliberate actions police say he took. And what of the families left behind? For them, justice is not theoretical. It's not legal briefs or court calendars. It's the empty chair at the dinner table. It's the laughter that once filled a room now replaced with silence. They want answers. They want accountability. But most of all, they want to understand why. A trial could begin later this year, or drag into the next. Legal hurdles lie ahead. Competency hearings, pretrial motions, possibly a plea. But one truth remains. For Ashly McFarland's family, and for those who knew Felicia Leonard, no outcome in court will bring them back. The law may deliver punishment, but justice? That's something far more elusive. The crime scene has long been cleared. The headlines have faded from the front page. The community, though shaken, begins the quiet work of healing. But questions still echo through the silence. Was this premeditated? A planned act born from festering anger and old grudges? Or the spontaneous collapse of a mind no longer tethered to reality? Why Felicia? Why did Reuben Leonard turn the weapon on his wife, the woman who shared his home, his history, before stepping outside into the daylight with fatal intent? Was she trying to stop him? Did she know something no one else did? Or was her death the first step in a decision only he understood? Was this about noise? Or control? Or the final detonation of a mind long in decline? These are questions investigators have asked. Questions that prosecutors will weigh. Questions that the families and the public may never see answered fully. Because the truth is, sometimes there's no satisfying explanation. No moment of clarity. No journal entry or confession that makes it all make sense. Sometimes we're left with fragments of lives, of motives, of meaning. And sometimes, those unanswered questions are the most haunting part of all. If you found this case as unsettling and tragic as we did, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share this video to honor Ashly and Felicia and to remind us all that silence in the face of danger isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just the quiet before everything changes. Stay informed, stay aware, and join us for more stories that ask the questions we all need to confront.